Israel launched more than 60 airstrikes on Syria, advancing towards Damascus countryside. UN invite to Syria. Pedersen urges lifting sanctions, justice and rebuilding Syria for long-term stability. And Damascus schools reopen with celebrations and challenges for new leadership. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time and you're watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Syria. Syrian media has reported that Israeli carried out over 60 airstrikes within 5 hours, targeting military sites around Damascus. In addition, Israeli forces reported the advance towards the village of Al-Mu'allaqa in the Damascus countryside. These developments come amid heightened tensions and escalating military activity in the region, deepening the already fragile situation. The UN Special Envoy to Syria, Pedersen, has arrived in Damascus, calling for swift action to lift sanctions and support reconstruction efforts. Pedersen emphasized the need for justice and accountability through a credible system while balancing immediate humanitarian relief with long-term stability. His visit marks a renewed diplomatic push to address Syria's future, underscoring the urgency of rebuilding efforts and ensuring accountability for past crimes.
A credible justice system, and that we don't see any. We need to see that this is.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held a call with US President-elect Donald Trump to discuss several topics, including Syria, the Gaza war, and a detainee exchange deal with Hamas. Israeli officials have noted significant progress in negotiations with Hamas, showing readiness for an agreement. The chiefs of Mossad and Shin Bet, Israel's security agency, informed the Israeli cabinet of potential breakthroughs. Trump advisor Adam Boehler is expected to visit Israel this week for talks as speculation grows that the Gaza war could end after Trump's inauguration.
Agreed to negotiate peace with the Palestinians on the basis of your peace plan.
Turkish Defense Minister Yasar Gula has stated that Syria's new administration should be given a chance to govern, citing its constructive messages. He added that Turkey is ready to provide military training if requested. The Turkish Defense Minister noted that there were no signs of a full Russian withdrawal following al-Assad's fall. Ankara may reassess its military presence in Syria as conditions evolve. The new administration has pledged to respect governmental institutions, the UN and international organizations. Schools in Damascus has reopened 1 week after Bashar al-Assad's ouster. Al-Jawdat al-Hashimi school, the Syrian flag was raised amid celebrations by students and teachers. The world watches as the new leadership faces the challenges of stabilizing the nation. Turkey has reopened its embassy in Damascus, becoming the first to do so since the end of Bashar al-Assad's government. President Erdogan pledged support for Syria's reconstruction. The former Turkish ambassador to Mauritania was appointed acting business manager. Turkey has closed its embassy in 2012, signaling a significant shift in diplomatic relations as the country began its rebuilding efforts. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has urged international support for the repatriation of Syrian refugees, calling for early recovery efforts in securing areas of Syria. Speaking at a gathering of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's party, Mikati highlighted Syria's devastation after 13 years of war, with al-Assad now in exile. Mikati also expressed hope that Lebanon's ceasefire with Israel could pave the way for lasting stability in the region.
The international community, particularly Europe, should assist in the return of Syrians by engaging.
Arab, Turkish and European diplomats have concluded a meeting in Jordan's Aqaba, stressing the need for an inclusive Syrian government that respects minority rights. Regional and global powers were vying for influence after al-Assad fled last week. Though his key allies, Russia and Iran, were excluded, U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Blinken, outlined the vision for Syria's transition.
We had this meeting together with the international actors as well as
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has urged Israel to immediately halt its activities in Syria. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced an agreement among top diplomats from the U.S., Turkey and the EU and Arab nations to ensure minority rights in Syria's future government. Talks in Jordan and contacts with rebels followed President Bashar al-Assad's ouster as global and regional powers vie for influence over Syria's post-Assad leadership. Syria has been facing mounting challenges amid Israeli airstrikes, diplomatic efforts for peace, and struggles to build infrastructure. The details.
Syria remains on edge following a series of 60 Israeli airstrikes targeting areas around Damascus and the Rif Dimashq countryside. The strikes reportedly focused on locations linked to arms depots and military infrastructure, further exacerbating the region's instability. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to expand their occupation in southern Syria, underscoring the ongoing escalation of aggression on multiple fronts. Amid the aftermath, Damascus International Airport is preparing to resume operations, with domestic flights expected to restart in the coming days. Syrian officials view this as a critical step toward restoring essential transportation services, even as the nation grapples with severe challenges to its infrastructure and security. Diplomatic efforts have also gained momentum. UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, arrived in Damascus for talks with Syrian officials, following regional discussions with Jordan's Aqaba. Foreign ministers from Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bahrain issued a joint statement calling for a peaceful political transition in Syria, signaling a unified regional push toward resolving the prolonged crisis. These developments highlight Syria's multifaceted challenges: persistent military tensions, the struggle to rebuild critical infrastructure, and intensify diplomatic efforts to address its humanitarian and political crises.
Well, welcome back, and for more analysis, we'll now move to Salma in our newsroom. Salma.
Thank you, Mona. And for further analysis on the current situation in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by the international relations expert, Mohammed Osman. Welcome to Qnews, Dr. Osman. And let me start off first and see what you think about the recent 60 Israeli airstrikes on Syria and the impact of on the stability of the country overall.
Thank you for having me, Salma. Of course, Israel's ongoing transgressions inside Syria are a major destabilizing factor and is causing great concern to the Syrian people and as well to the many Arab countries and many countries around the world as well. Israel last night carried 60 airstrikes, and before that they carried over 500 airstrikes across Syria, destroying and decimating the majority of the infrastructure, 80% according to Israeli sources of Syria's military infrastructure. By that, they destroyed all the equipment of the different branches of the armed forces. And this is to ensure that Syria will never again maintain a coherent military force that is capable of maintaining the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I think this is the main Israeli goal behind these actions, taking advantage of the vacuum caused by the fall of the Assad regime and the Syrian state in order to ensure what I have just mentioned. And also Israel is moving on the ground by expanding beyond the occupied Golan Heights and occupying over 200 square kilometers. That's almost the size of the Gaza Strip, or about two-thirds of the Gaza Strip, inside Syria, including the strategic Jebel al-Sheikh, which is called in Israel Mount Hermon, and also marching into southern Der'a and the countryside of Damascus. And now they are about 25 kilometers away from Damascus. And in addition to that, just moments ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that Israel will expand its illegal settlements inside the occupied Syrian Golan Heights in light of these events. So it seems that Israel's presence inside Syria will be permanent. There is even talk of establishing a ski resort in Jebel al-Sheikh, which is a very provocative announcement by some Israeli private sector agencies, and as well as the visits by Israeli settlement builders and radical people.
And with Damascus International Airport preparing to resume operations, what does this, do you think, signify for Syria's recovery efforts?
Of course, in the midst of all of this chaos, whether internally or because of Israel's actions or the chaos inside Syria itself, the fall of the Syrian government, the current caretaker government led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS, which is vying for international legitimacy and recognition, seeks to spread a sense of, or establish a sense of normalcy in the country, to establish confidence and to demonstrate that they are able to provide services and control the country. And one of the instrumental ways to do that is by reopening the Damascus airport in an attempt to demonstrate that they are able to maintain communications with the rest of the world. And this might be a good sign if the airport is reopened and flights are restored. However, I fail to see how would this solve any Syria's ailing problems. Syria's problems are much deeper than the opening of an airport, of the rebuilding of a road.
Absolutely. What are the expectations surrounding Geir Pedersen's visit to Damascus, and what role do you think he will play in the ongoing diplomatic talks?
I think that the UN envoy going to Damascus and visiting Syria for the first time since the fall of Assad is significant, and I think it might revitalize the UN role inside Syria, especially that the UN has been completely ineffective, and the UN envoy, whether Mr. Pedersen or his predecessors before him for the past 13 years, haven't been able to effect any change or broker any deal to end the chaos in Syria. Maybe now with the semblance or with the promise of more stability, at least temporary in the near future, maybe then the UN might be able to play a prominent role in pushing forward a political transition in Syria in line with Resolution 2254, Security Council, of course.
And how do you assess the joint statement lately by the foreign ministers of Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bahrain regarding Syria's future?
It demonstrated the Arab vision for Syria onward. The statement by the Arab countries is responsible and holds the national interest of Syria and the Syrian people at heart. It stressed the sanctity of Syrian territories and Syrian sovereignty, and they supported Syrian sovereignty, and they condemned Israel's actions in Syria, and they also called for an inclusive political transition that is democratic and representative of all the segments of Syrian society and all religious sects and all ethnic groups. And this is very important, especially since the political transition inside Syria led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham right now does not seem to be moving in that direction. So I think that was a message by the Arab countries to the new authorities in Syria that you need to be more inclusive and more open. And of course, it also called for national reconciliation and dialogue, and I think this is very important in order for Syria not to descend into another round of civil war.
Within that framework, what do you think are the prospects then for a peaceful transition in Syria, and how can the regional powers influence the process of moving towards and moving forward?
As we have seen, the Arab powers in the region are being very responsible. However, other regional actors need to play a more active and positive role. A regional actor like Turkey needs to commit to the unity of Syria and to the independence of Syria as a nation state, and that their support should only be directed in this regard. And also Israel should stop its aggression. It's another regional actor that is actively cutting out chunks of Syria and taking advantage of the chaos that is going on. So, and Iran should never again engage in any destabilizing activities in Syria the way it did in previous times. I think all of these regional actors need to come together and form a common vision to support the hopes and aspirations of the Syrian people to establish a democratic, inclusive state and government that is representative to all of their aspirations.
Dr. Osman, what do you think are the future scenarios for the upcoming period when it comes to the situation in the Middle East, especially with U.S. Blinken's Middle East tour?
I think that Mr. Blinken's tour mainly focused on Syria, and of course the United States has a vested interest in marketing what happened in Syria as a positive move and as a success, because the fall of the Assad regime plays directly in favor of their interests, because it diminished the Russian and Iranian influence inside Syria. And also they are very keen that Syria does not become once more a source of terrorism and radical terrorism, especially the terrorism undertaken by movements like ISIS. So I think that they are seeking guarantees, and they do have these guarantees from the new government in Syria, and they are seeking regional support in this regard, and they are seeking as well to safeguard the existence of forces such as SDF and the Kurdish factions under the umbrella of SDF that play a pivotal role in fighting ISIS and radical Islamists in eastern Syria. However, I do not think the United States has a coherent vision for what Syria should be, and they deal with Syria just like another chess piece in a huge game of geopolitical chess between them and regional powers such as Iran and global powers such as Russia. So I do not see what the United States can contribute positively, at least the Biden administration. When the Trump administration comes, we will see how they view the situation in Syria and what their policy and their vision towards it will be.
Well, that was the international relations expert, Mohammed Osman. Thank you so much for your insights. And we're back to you again, Mona.
Thank you so much, Salma, for the very insightful analysis. And we move to the latest developments in Gaza. Israeli occupation forces have stormed a school in Beit Hanun, northern Gaza, killing at least 15 people and injuring several others. According to Palestinian media, Israeli troops surrounded the Khalil Awaida school, which was sheltering displaced families. The troops targeted civilians with gunfire and artillery shelling, forcing the remaining people to leave under threat of violence. At least 14 people have been killed and 30 others injured after Israeli occupation forces conducted a series of airstrikes across Gaza. Palestinian media reported that the occupation forces targeted tents sheltering displaced people in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, and struck Khirbet al-Ats, north of Rafah. Gaza-based health authorities have confirmed that the Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has exceeded 44,900, with over 106,000 individuals injured. They added that Israeli occupation forces committed 5 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours, killing at least 46 Palestinians and injuring 135 others. Protesters in Tel Aviv have demanded a deal to free detainees taken by Hamas, while also calling for elections and for Netanyahu's resignation. The October 7th war has devastated Gaza with nearly 45,000 deaths reported. Efforts by Egypt, Qatar and the US to broker a truce and a detainee deal have gained traction as Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi discussed them with US officials. Israeli occupation forces have arrested 7 Palestinians from various cities in the occupied West Bank since yesterday evening. The arrests included a woman from Qalqiliyah. This is part of the ongoing Israeli military assaults in the West Bank, which has intensified in recent months, with frequent raids and arrests targeting Palestinians. The Israeli occupation forces are preparing to deploy automated weapon systems mounted on surveillance towers in the occupied West Bank for the first time. The plan was reported by Israeli Army Radio this morning. The system is advanced weaponry developed by Rafael Advanced Defense System. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has expressed deep concern over the recent Israeli escalation of unlawful action in the occupied West Bank. In a statement, that the ministry explained that the annexation measures are being implemented through the seizure of tens of thousands of dunams of land, the installation of Israeli surveillance and communication towers, and provocative calls for Israel's far right urging the deployment and establishment of additional checkpoints at major road junctions. Moving on to Lebanon, caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has emphasized the importance of fully implementing the ceasefire agreement to safeguard Lebanon's sovereignty, facilitate the return of displaced citizens and reduce tensions along the southern border. Mikati called on the US and France as guarantors of the agreement to ensure compliance. He urged international support, highlighting Lebanon's humanitarian and economic crisis caused by Israeli aggression, estimating that $5 billion is needed for the reconstruction. Mikati also stressed the importance of stabilizing constitutional institutions, starting with the election of a new president. And moving on to Asia, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has praised South Korean democratic resilience after President Yoon Suk-yeol was impeached. Speaking in Jordan, Blinken emphasized the peaceful constitutional process and expressed readiness to work with acting President Han Duck-soo. Yoon, impeached over a controversial attempt to impose martial law, vowed to fight for his future as the Constitutional Court reviews the case, potentially leading to a snap election within 6 months.
And we're ready to work with President Han as he assumes office. Most important.
That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. Israel launched more than 60 airstrikes on Syria, advancing towards Damascus countryside. UN envoy to Syria, Pedersen urges lifting sanctions, justice and rebuilding Syria for long-term stability. and Damascus schools reopen with celebrations and challenges for new leadership. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.